I'm going to have us go ahead and get started here with our next speaker. So this presentation is about bike maps, using level of traffic stress analysis to keep people safe instead of showing off unsafe bike infrastructure. And our presenter will be Ray Atkinson. Ray was born and raised in the Charlotte, North Carolina region. He has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Geography from UNC Charlotte and a Master of Urban Planning and Regional Planning degree from Portland State. He has blogged about how GIS can be used for activism. You should check out his blog. It's linked on our website. There's some really good stuff in there. So we'll go ahead and pass it off to you, Ray.
Thank you. So yeah, once again, my name is Ray Atkinson. I'm currently in Oregon City, work for Clackamas Community College. But my presentation today will be about my blog and how I use that for GIS activism. And so I'm going to share my screen to show a lot of bike maps. So I hope you like interactive maps. So screen one. Okay, and let me know if you can't see anything as I go through this. And I may need to reshare it with audio. So we just do that one quick second. Share audio, and then do it again. That should work better. Cool. So this is my blog. I started back in 2014. And so I've been blogging for, I guess it's about 8 years now. I have about 103 or 4 posts. And so just blogging about, how I get around and barriers that exist for my transportation access. And so this post right here is from 2015. So data is a little bit out of date, but it gets the point across that bike maps, in my mind, are used to show off instead of keeping cyclists safe. And so I don't read the whole post, but I'm going to share some figures from this. This here shows basically people want to have, or cities want to have as much infrastructure as possible, but this doesn't say how safe the infrastructure is. And so, Portland is about right here, and then you have San Francisco the highest. This is back in 2014. And so basically cities are just installing it and hoping it works for their users. Then as I scroll down here for when I was at Total Design Group in DC area, I worked on a level of traffic stress map and also a bike infrastructure map. And so this map here in Charlottesville, Virginia shows these blue lines are bike lanes. And this doesn't say whether the bike lane is safe or not. It just says it's a line of paint. And so when I compare this, keep an eye on this area here when I move on to the level of traffic stress map, because this here is a red line, which red line means level of traffic stress 4, which is the most stressful level. I'll explain in next maps what these levels mean, but basically level of traffic stress 1 means least stressful, 2 and 3 are middle ground, and then 4 is most stressful. And so even though this road has bike lane on it, it's red, so it's still stressful. And so this, in my mind, is more helpful to know I should avoid this if I want to have a less stressful route than knowing it has a bike lane or not. And so I'm going to come back to my blog after I showed 2 other maps. I have a video down below here, but I'm going to first show examples of what could be done a little bit better. And so this is Metro's map, and it has a little bit better than just showing bike lanes, because it says like, bike with caution. So when you zoom in, it has some red areas like here with, hotspot areas like in downtown where it's not as safe to bike. And so it's not just showing you bike lanes, it shows you what streets to avoid, because it's, higher traffic, higher speed, narrow lanes, but it still has, it says there's bike lanes, but, bike lanes on certain roads are not as safe as others, like, Southwest Broadway shown as green, but not everyone feels comfortable biking on Southwest Broadway. And so I want to show you the next map that shows, I think it's even better than showing bike with caution. This is from Montgomery County, Maryland, in the DC region. I used to work there doing capital bike share planning. And one thing you'll see here is this map shows no bike lanes or any high, it doesn't say whether a with caution or whatever. It rates it by, is it high stress low stress or very low stress. And then you can figure out where the gaps are in the area. So when you're very low stress, there's a lot of disconnections. Like if you want to like leave these certain neighborhoods, you can't go anywhere really without getting on a stressful, red area here, because this is the only way to get two places is the red routes. And so this map here, I think is more useful for cyclists and keeps them safe because it's actually saying whether it's safe and with the actual, because there's bike lanes in here, it just doesn't show you the bike lanes. So it says how safe or unsafe the bike lanes are. And you can play around this. It has videos also showing what different levels are. And it also has like create map sheds as well, which is pretty cool. So you can have add points, and it'll show you how far you can bike in these areas as well. So see if it goes. 1 second. Yeah, this tool, and so it's basically can't go anywhere with, because the stressfulness of one with low stress limits you to this area. But if I change this to high, I believe it will give you more area. And so these are some useful tools for figuring out how far you can go with the network. So that's shows you more, if you're willing to get on a stressful routes, this is how far you can go. Let's see, there's a chat. Yeah, thanks. So I wish this kind of tool was available in the Portland region, because I think this is more useful to have than just say, okay, use caution on this route and hope the bike lanes like in downtown Portland are safe, which they're not all safe. And so that's the maps I want to show you. And then I'm going to end my presentation with a video, and it's an hour-long video, but I'm going to show a few minutes of it, and we can start questions after that.
One is to say, well, it's all the places where a bicycle is legally allowed to ride. I mean, that's your bike network. Where can you ride? And there are cities who say, you want to see our bike network map? Here's our city map. Here's a city street map. That's your bike network. A second definition is every city, hopefully, has some facilities that they have, designed and for bicycling, bike lanes and some things like that. And naturally, they keep an inventory of those. So they could say, well, here's our inventory of bike facilities. That's our bike network. Another one is, if I'm trying to give information to the public, here are some good routes. Here's some suggested routes where you can ride. The places where we think is the best. It may not be that good, but it's still maybe the best in a certain corridor. And so that's the bike network. And for instance, the city where I came from, that's what the bike network maps are. But I'm going to start with a different starting point for what is the bicycling network. And we'll define it this way: the set of streets or path segments that an individual says, that doesn't exceed my tolerance for traffic stress. I'm willing to ride on those. And the others I'm not willing to ride on. With that definition, which I think is a definition that makes sense, we end up with a network that is very different from the kinds of transportation networks we're used to seeing. You end up with the possibility, now it doesn't have to be this way, but in many American cities it will be this way, that this network will be disconnected. That between where you are and where you want to go, there simply may not be a continuous route that you can follow without having to get on higher stress segments than you're willing to get to. So if you could map where the low stress segments are, and this is just what we did for the city of San Jose, later on I'll tell you how we classified them. But if you could map them, here's what the map looks like. In case you're familiar with San Jose, this is the Los Gatos Creek Trail, and the top of the area is the Willow Glen neighborhood. And what you see is there are there's lots of green there, lots of low-stress streets, but so many of it, there's just isolated islands. Johnny can leave his home, ride his bike around the neighborhood, but you just can't get very far. You can't without meeting a high-stress barrier. To make this even clearer, using GIS, we can just pick a starting point and say, and ask the network analysis, calculate for us all the points that you could get to on the really low stress routes from this starting point. And every different color you see, we had to have a different starting point. So for instance, you see San Jose State University. So from that as a starting point, that brown area, that's where you can get to very low stress routes from San Jose State University, San Jose City College. Every one of these is a different isolated network. You can't get from one of these to another without riding on a higher stress link. The shapes are interesting, like you see this very long, thin one. That's because it's an off-road trail. It's very nice low stress facility. Unfortunately, and likewise here, nice off-road trail, and the third one. Unfortunately, there aren't many low stress access points to get to those low stress trails. So we end up with islands. Here's a close-up of, now I'm going up to level of stress 2, thinking about the mainstream traffic intolerant adult rooted at San Jose State University. If you were a student there, or you worked there, and you said, I want to live someplace where I can ride to school, but I don't want to have to fight with the high-stress traffic, you got a pretty limited area, the old downtown, the older developed downtown area, you got a pretty limited area that you could be. San Jose State University ought to have thousands of bikes parked there, and it doesn't. The city of San Jose, the bike share for journey to work, 0.6%. If you compare that with Portland, or a couple of cities that I also visited recently, Eugene and Corvallis, the bike share is much higher, and I think I figured out why. It's because it never rains in Oregon, and in California it's... No, you don't think that's the reason? No, I think the reason actually has more to do with traffic stress. And then here are what the stress islands look like if people who are willing to go up to level of stress 2. Still, you have these different islands. You can't get, for example, you couldn't ride a bike from San Jose State to San Jose City College without having to get on some high-stress links to get between those islands. We could have made more islands. I mean, the white space could be filled in with other colors and so on. The city becomes divided into like ice flows in the Arctic. You know, you're on one island, I'm on another one. We just can't get between each other because of there are these higher stress links that a person doesn't want to use. So now when it comes to connectivity, we define connectivity as, can you get from here to there without exceeding a certain level of traffic stress. So we could pick a level of traffic stress, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, bring in that subpart of the network that doesn't exceed that, and then ask, can you get from here to there? So as you've seen, sometimes you simply can't get from here to there. Sometimes, however, like these 2 points, you could get from here to there, but the route that you have to follow is so circuitous that most people they just wouldn't consider that as a possible route. Or here's another example. Can you get between these 2 points, staying on the low stress routes? And if you look carefully, yeah, if you go north about, 3/4 of a mile and go across and then come south, you could. But most people would consider, I can't get from here to there. And so in addition to the stress criterion, we had to introduce a detour criterion. 2 points are, therefore, we say they're connected if you can get from here to there without exceeding your level of traffic stress and without undue detour. The detour criterion we used, and there's a little bit of research to support this, though it's of course, there isn't any hard, cliff drop off the edge of the cliff boundary, is that we shouldn't expect people to go more than 25% out of their way to go on a low stress route. Most people would just consider it's just not available if I have to go that far out of my way, or for very short trips, instead of a percentage, just a fixed amount, a third of a mile, which is about 2 minutes extra travel time. All right, now, where do we find our criteria for level of traffic stress? Well, there are a couple different sources. One is there's a body of American research that's gone into developing bicycle level of service and a similar model called the Bicycle Compatibility Index. And it's used by...
I'll leave time for questions. I know we're getting, I think about 15 minutes is what I heard I was supposed to present for. So I can always share more if there's questions about specific things, but I just wanted to, yeah, give opportunity for questions as well.
I can go ahead and kick it off for questions because I've had a burning question. I'm curious, like you kind of have this alternative or almost like counter mapping that's like kind of critique of what currently exists or just different. So how do you get people to listen to you? Like how do you get cities or local bike interest, like other activists involved? And how do you maybe get your ideas like out from yourself, I guess?
Yeah. I will say that most cities and regions are talking about this tool. I mean, it's not, you know, a secret tool. I mean, a lot of consulting groups like Alta Plan and Design, Tool Design Group, Dyson Nygaard, they're all doing this kind of analysis. Probably the biggest barrier is funding that, you know, like Oregon City, where I currently am, or Clackamas County, they don't really have the funds to pay for an expensive map. And so, especially with having COVID budget cuts right now with everything being restricted, this is kind of seen as like a fancy tool that not every city is gonna be like, oh, let's invest in this. They're gonna be like, let's just put it in our bike lanes and you know, show off to the country that we have this, and not invest in a more an accurate tool and a safer tool for the public, because you know, just showing bike lanes is cheap and easy to do. It's a matter of basically funding decisions and convincing people to invest in this tool.
That makes sense. Thank you. So it always comes down to funding, doesn't it?
And it's also, I guess, also add that it's getting the people in a room that understand what the value is, because, you know, I know what the value of this tool is, but even if they invest the money in it, if someone doesn't know how to do, like how to use GIS to create these like islands and, you know, figuring out where hotspots are, you know, where to prioritize the different infrastructure needs, then the tool is basically sitting there not being used to its full extent. And so having people like us in this conference having the skills to be able to use the tool is also helpful to be able to convince people to invest in it.
So we've got an in-person question. I think we have 2 in-person questions and a chat question. So I'll go ahead and go to you first.
My question is about using AI and Google Maps as an adjunct to GIS systems.
So using AI and Google Maps as an adjunct to bike map GIS systems.
I mean, I would assume that Google Maps machine learning probably takes advantage of real biker data. In other words, I say I'm going to go on a trip from here to Washington Park, right? And Google Maps tracks me all the way there, knows I'm on a bike for my speed, and I always find the safest routes. That's just my predilection as a bicyclist. And so it puts that into its AI and then comes up with the safest route that way.
Did you hear that okay, Ray?
Yeah, I guess one clarification I would make is it's your considered safety level as an adult person. And one goal of level of traffic stress 1 is to have like children and elderly people who are maybe less confident on the road. That Google Maps, when I've used Google Maps for biking directions, it's more targeted towards the adult cyclist who's willing to bike on busier roads. And it is not taking into consideration, you know, how stressful the route is for like, you know, young children or older people. And so I don't think it's really, I'm not seeing anything Google Maps that is doing that level of analysis to be able to say, you gotta stay on neighborhood streets because crossing this highway or this 4-lane road or this 60-mile-an-hour road, whatever, is gonna be too stressful. Google Maps is not going to do that from what I've seen. And so, yeah, it's something that I wish existed, but I don't think it exists in any apps that I've seen.
Okay, thanks. We've got another question, I think. Did you have a question, Aaron? Okay. Yeah, I think we got the other question. So if you want to ask, go for it.
Okay. So Portland has actually a pretty nice bicycle map. It's not, absolutely perfect, but it does show different levels of traffic. And I'm wondering, when you do your BLTS, your traffic stress calculations, like I'm in a transportation design class right now, so we've been doing these calculations. I'm like, well, you could take like the information from the road, the number of lanes, the buffers, et cetera, plus the AT, et cetera, right? And run that through to produce like a not perfect, but pretty reasonable map. Is that how you're producing your maps? I don't know how the Portland map is produced either, so I'm curious.
Did you hear that at all, Ray?
No,
No. Okay. Let me try to think how to paraphrase.
I can paraphrase.
Okay.
Is he using the essential LTS calculation factors in the GIS calculation to produce a level of traffic safety and color coded map?
Okay. So do you use LTS in your maps to produce the level of traffic safety? Like, what are the factors that go into that? Is that what you're asking? Like what the traffic stress factors are?
So that's a complicated question because it seems like every single map is created with a different methodology tool. I will say in the state of Oregon, I think most agencies use ODOT's. They have a level of traffic stress tool. And so I've seen most agencies use that, which I can send you. It's a 100-page document. It explains, it has charts and everything. But I used that tool whenever I was working with the city of Oregon City on their downtown Oregon City level traffic stress map, because they were trying to figure out where to prioritize bike improvements for the I-205 toll project with diversion through downtown. And so I worked with them on each segment, figuring out how to rate level traffic stress for each segment in downtown Oregon City. And so I use ODOT's tool for that. There are a lot of other tools. Some are very complex, like Montgomery County, Maryland. Their tool is like 2 spreadsheets because it's just very complicated and it has a lot of different analysis tools. And then some are very simple of having only one little chart. And so, yeah, the methodology gets really complex and it's kind of hard to compare maps when people use different methodologies. And so as someone who likes to compare, cities to cities, it's like you really can't do that very much when you have each city is using different methodologies.
Yeah, that sounds complicated.
Yeah.
Did I do an okay job of paraphrasing? Did that answer what you're asking? Okay. So basically it depends. Different everywhere.
One
Go ahead.
more, turn by turn guidance with voice, because I hate looking down at my map when I'm riding. I don't think any bicyclist should. Speaking of safety, that's really unsafe to be consulting your map while you're in unfamiliar territory. So what I'd rather have is something that would kind of like in a mellow voice cut through my music that I'm listening to. And say,
Like
hey, you gotta make
GPS.
a left up there to stay on the low stress route, right? Is that something that's even being thought of, or is that?
I think from my standpoint, partly because the apps means you have to have, you have to smartphone and data plan everything. And as a planner, I try to look out people who don't have, data plan and smartphones. And so I think in order to get both people who don't have access to that technology and the low-income people, I look into wayfinding, like on a street, sort of like what Portland does with its neighborhood greenway system. So you can have, because usually the neighborhood greenways in Portland are pretty safe and comfortable. And so in the wayfinding there with sharrows and street signs, I think that's a pretty effective way to keep people, directions and without having to use a smartphone. And I know some cities are doing more neighborhood greenways. Oregon City, where I live, they're trying to, they're not quite there yet. But yeah, Portland's one of the leading examples in the country of doing good wayfinding for low stress routes.
Do you think the green signs in Portland are effective. I don't know how many people in the audience are bikers. Are the green
Yeah, it's
signs,
not perfect.
you go this way to the East Bank Esplanade, and you get there and wow, it's just jam packed with people. It's a Sunday, right? Bad idea. So, you think they're effective? That's low tech, right? But do you think do they correlate to the low stress routes?
They're as good as it can be, not perfect. I think with having, new infrastructures installed in certain places and, maps change over time. So I don't think it'll ever be perfect with wayfinding, but I think Portland's efforts to do neighbor greenway system is better than a lot of other cities are doing, because like when I was down in Tucson, Arizona for vacation like a month or two ago, they put bike route on every single road had a bike lane. And it's like, no, don't put a bike route sign on every single road that has a bike lane, because it's just a line of paint. It's not going to protect you. And so I think Portland's strategy to use neighbor greenways is better than what other cities are doing.
So this question was from a little bit ago, so you might have somewhat answered it, but they asked, are there any governments who do use this type of tool and level of stress analysis in their bike infrastructure publications?
I think the best one I've seen so far is Montgomery County, Maryland, the tool that I shared. I know Arlington County, Virginia, which is just on the other side of DC from Montgomery County, they've created a paper map and a PDF, so it's not interactive. It's not as good as Montgomery County, but at least they have some stress mapping in their mapping tool. And I know that like the consulting groups like Alta Plan and Design, which is I think based in Portland, and then Tool Design Group, they basically, whenever they get hired to do plans for cities, they create these level of traffic stress maps for pretty much every client. And so assuming those clients, take it out of the plan and publicize it as a bike map, then you have that as a bike map pretty much every city that is able to afford the map. So it is a trend I think that's going on in this industry, and just a matter of getting cities to see the value of promoting lower traffic stress map instead of bike map. But I think part of that hurdle is that the general public doesn't really understand what these number 1 through 4 means without having like a separate guide, which means you have to have a larger map to explain what these levels mean. Because most general cyclists would be like, okay, where's the bike lane? And low traffic stress does not show a bike lane on it. And so it's a little learning curve that I think has to happen in order for cities to feel comfortable with promoting this new map to the general public, to educate them on the value of it and say, you're not gonna have a bike lane on it, and you're going to just trust us that this is saying what's the safest and best route for you.
Okay, we've got about 1 minute left, so we're going to take the last question. Go ahead, Becky.
What is Portland doing right? Portland's noted as one of the #1 bike cities in the country. So what would be one of the key factors of why it gets that rating?
Okay, so they asked, what is Portland doing right? That Portland's one of the highest ranked bike cities. And so what are the factors that go into that ranking or that perception? Number 1, the highest.
I think that's another complicated question because it depends on what rating system you look at. Personally, I prefer looking at there's the, I guess, in Denmark, in Copenhagen, they have a Copenhagenized index, which is an international ranking system, and Portland is not even on it. And so I just want to kind of push back against Portland being number 1, because yes, it's number 1 in the US, but I look at international rankings, and yeah, I think the only city in North America that's on that, I think, is maybe Vancouver, British Columbia, or maybe another Canadian city. And so, but yes, from a US standpoint, the bike rankings say that we're number 1, Portland's number 1, or Minneapolis or New York City or Boston, maybe San Francisco, but none of those cities are on an international Copenhagenized index. So I want to make them
just
even
to
better.
follow up on that, does that mean we're just number 1 because everything else is so bad? Or are there truly some like things that Portland's doing a really good job at?
It's doing good at neighborhood greenways. I mean, people come from the country to ride on neighborhood greenways and get bike tours, and it's not many cities have the neighborhood greenway system and trail network that Portland has. It's not perfect. Like, it has a gap in Sellwood with the Springwater Trail. You have to go on through Sellwood. You can't be on a trail there. But yeah, besides that, it's pretty good network for a lot of cities.
All right, well, thanks so much, Ray. It's great to have you. We're going to take about a 4-minute break, and then we're going to have Richard speaking about public housing in Oregon. So thanks, everyone.